So good morning to everyone who's present here. And thank you so much for being here and patiently waiting for the guests. My name is Kshitij, and I'll be moderating this session. I will be primarily asking questions to our guests. If there are any questions from you, we'll definitely take them towards the end of the session. To begin with, can I please now introduce formally our esteemed guests on the stage, and I'll begin with Rachna Bisht Rawat. Rachna Rawat is a prominent Indian author, journalist, and a documentary filmmaker. She is best known for her works in the genre of narrative non-fiction, which focuses on the lives of ordinary people who have accomplished ordinary feats. Rachna ma'am's writing is characterized by her ability to capture the human spirit in challenging circumstances and her unique perspective on history and contemporary society. Her notable works include The Brave, Kargil Untold Stories from the War, and Shooting the Moon. Rachna ma'am has received numerous awards for her contributions to Indian literature and journalism, and she continues to inspire readers with her engaging storytelling. Her latest book is titled Bipin, The Man Behind the Uniform, a book on the former CDS of India, General Bipin Rawat. Give it up for Rachna ma'am. Our second esteemed guest today, Tuhin Sinha, is a best-selling author, columnist, and a politician. Tuhin is acknowledged among the most prolific Indian writers with a maverick knack to experiment with new genres. Tuhin's recent releases includes the first two books of his trilogy, The Legend of Birsa Munda and the Great Tribal Warriors of Bharat, besides a geopolitical thriller set against a pandemic backdrop, Mission Shenzhen. Tuhin's books traverse a wide range of genres and include socio-political thrillers and romantic sagas. He's also written extensively on political issues. Tuhin is a popular media voice for the BJP and represents the party on prime-time TV debates. Give it up for Tuhin, sir. Our third esteemed guest for today, Probal DasGupta. Probal DasGupta is a highly respected linguist and professor from India with a focus on language variation and multilingualism. He has made significant contribution to the study of language contact and language policy, particularly in the context of South Asia. Probal sir also has been a prominent advocate for linguistic diversity and the recognition of minority languages and has written extensively on these topics. In addition to his academic work, he is also known for his popular science writing, including books that make linguistics accessible to a wider audience. Give it up for Probal sir. A very warm welcome to all three of you, sirs and ma'am. My first question is about biographies. So when we talk about literature, we have non-fiction and we have fiction. And when we talk about non-fiction, there are biographies. Now when biographies are written, it is about a person. Usually when we talk about a biography always shows the positive or the good side of a person. Every coin has two sides. Do you think when we talk of biographies, do you think that the narrative is sometimes one-sided? Anyone can answer.
So I've just come out with a biography, so I think I'll have to answer this.
Sure.
Yes, you're right. Biographies tend to show the nicer side of the person, and we tend to hide their faults. Most biographers do that, whereas you're right, they should show both sides of the coin. So I can give you the writer's perspective on that. When I started doing my book on General Bipin Rawat, there has been a lot of criticism about him also, especially within the forces. And there is a big lobby that does not like him or did not like his policies. So I took a few months to sign that contract because for me to do 45,000 words on a person, I had to like the person. And when you like a person, you know their flaws. It's not as if it's like you like your maybe girlfriend or your boyfriend or your mother or your brother. So you love them, but it's not that you only see the nicer side, you know their faults as well. And the whole objective, so after a few months of research, talking to people, I realized that he had his flaws, but I liked him. I liked him as a person, which was required. Otherwise, you can't write 45,000 words about a person you don't approve of or you don't like. It's an entire waste of effort. So I did look at his flaws, and those of you who will, I am hoping some of you will read the biography, they will see that those points also come up. But what I've tried to do is, I've tried to look inside his mind to see his reasons for doing that. So you and I might not like some of the things he did, which might be wrong, but what were his reasons? So it's basically, essentially, a look at him as a man and the way his mind worked. And I guess that's how I've tried to do it.
I'll just further this question a little bit more. You're saying that you need to like a person to write 45,000 words. I can write 90,000 words if I don't like the person.
Oh, I guess that'll make a very interesting book. And it's a power you have, so you must do it.
No, so would you sirs want to contribute anything to what I just said about biographies? Tuhin sir.
Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Morning, everybody, in fact. So I wrote a book on Birsa Munda, and to write a biography of a character, who's not alive, and a character who belongs to the tribal community, a tribal warrior, a phase or a facet of our freedom movement, which anyway is not reported, is anyway tough. So in that case, yes, I mean, there would be certain things which you may not entirely relate with about that person. But then, the idea is to like a person with all his flaws, because I think all popular people have their misgivings and have their flaws. A godman for some could be a conman for the other person. But the idea is to bring in a certain objectivity in your writing, a certain believability, and I think that was my effort in the course of writing that book, to make it seem plausible, to make it seem reasonable, the actions, whether you liked it or not. And I think that's what the more real characters you create, the more real situations you create, that's what makes it more readable and more relatable for the readers.
Probal sir, would you like to add something to this?
So just before I add to this, I just wanted to bring into perspective. So my who I am. So I've written a book called Watershed 1967.
Yes.
And I think I share a name with a linguist who is very well known.
Okay.
And I'm proud to be introduced as him. But so I write non-fiction, and I'm writing a biography.
Okay.
And since my co-panelists have had far greater experience in writing biographies, one of the things that I was carefully listening to them as well. And I tend to agree on one count that biographies are a wholesome account of the person, and it has to be a 360 degree. There would be objectivity, but there would also be a certain preference for the kind of tonality that you would adopt, and that is a prerogative of the writer, and that must remain. Otherwise, it just becomes a textbook. It has to have a certain tonality, and there's certain argument that an author makes while writing a biography. However, as Tuhin said, rightly so, I think there has to be objectivity. It cannot become a hagiography. It has to be, there has to be a certain objectivity in terms of, why do you think, certain people feel differently about the subject of the book, and why do people think in favor of the subject of the book. I think that is essential. Having said that, I always believe that there is a voice of the writer which must come through, and that should not be mistaken for lack of objectivity. I think that is a voice, that is an argument that an author makes, and without being biased. That's important, being objective, but there is a voice, and that needs to be respected. You cannot, I think that is where I think biographies should be placed. Objective, but it has to have a voice of the author. If you have Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi's a biography written by 4 or 5 people, they would have different voices, different ways of writing it. And most of them would be objective, but they would have a certain tonality which is specific to the author.
So,
I don't recall any or too many biographies that have been meant to demonize a person. Would you? I mean, they're normally written because you are in awe of the person or you want to celebrate the person. Of course, I mean, while being objective about.
so I agree to what you're saying, and that is exactly my point, right? I mean, can't a person be demonized, or not demonized, but can't we show the other side of a person if a biography
like
is being
Hitler,
written?
for that matter, like Hitler, a biography of Hitler would have that perspective. But yeah, we're waiting for yours, the hate biography.
I don't see myself writing anything in the except for some Instagram stories or status updates. But since we're sitting with the Gen Z, and I hope no one takes offense to that, or the millennials, it is a very common set norm that reading is becoming lesser popular by the day, and that is something which most people believe. I don't, but probably the statistics or the sale of books is kind of showing. Now, it all started with Twitter when it came down and said कि 140 characters में जितना बताना है बता दो, उससे ज़्यादा आप नहीं बोल सकते. And now we are in a stage or in a situation where even our WhatsApp story or Instagram story doesn't stay for more than 24 hours. How do you see literature evolving in the coming 5 years or 10 years? Do you think it needs to become microfiction? Do you think it needs to become more exciting? I don't know.
So, So, I think, literature has evolved over the ages. If you look at how books were perceived in the earlier ages, books used to be made into plays. As time wore on, those books were made into movies. And now you have books made into OTT series. And so, you have books and you have a canvas where the books find an extended life. And that will always, with technology, with the passage of time, the way books are projected will always be varied, will always differ. There'll be different platforms. You're talking about Twitter, I mentioned OTT. So, there'll be different canvases for the depiction of the stories in the book, whether it's films or OTT, as technology advances and as our preferences kind of mature. Having said that, the basic form, which is the plot, the story, the essence of interest about human lives, emanate from the book. And my understanding, that will always provide the depth to the varied forms of, whether it's movies or plays or other things that evolve. But it always comes from that root, that genesis, which is the narrative, the story, the book, and therefore the plot, and the play, therefore the book. So it will always have a significance. How it is perceived, how it is reflected and absorbed by the society will always keep changing.
So I don't think reading habits have gone down, they've only gone up. But now they're reading a different form of literature, WhatsApp literature, Facebook literature, Instagram stories, which is actually quite dangerous because that is happening at the cost of books. So I think it's a problem which is quite universal because people have a limited attention span and whatever comes to them quickly or easily. So, an Instagram story doesn't require you to fetch a book. But yes, I mean, they've been reading all the wrong sort of things, and we need to somewhere, I think digital consumption needs to decrease so that physical, reading in physical form can be encouraged once again.
I think there are different forms of reading and writing. So people like us, my generation, I don't know about Z can tell us what they do. But I would see Twitter and I would see Instagram and also Facebook, which is, I think, no longer Z. But I would also read books. And you can read books, you can hear books on audio. So a lot of people travel and they hear stories. People read ebooks, so you could be reading it on your laptop or on your Kindle. Yeah, absolutely. So I think storytelling won't go out of fashion, and the different styles of telling stories will also not go out of fashion. We watch serials, आप लोग देखते होंगे जो season पे season. I don't know how many seasons of Game of Thrones, how many of you have seen? I've seen all of them. So that is a long format of storytelling. कितने it lasts months and years. In fact, prequel आ गया है, sequel आने वाला है. So I think all forms of storytelling will stay, whether it's the written or the digital or whatever. That's my belief and my hope.
No, absolutely. Storytelling is not going anywhere, and I completely agree to that, because everything that we do, even if we are narrating कि आज canteen में क्या हुआ to a friend or to someone else, it is still a part of storytelling, of how we also use imagination and how we also use masala in it. So eventually storytelling तो हर एक जगह पर relevant है और आने वाले समय में भी रहने ही वाला है. But storytelling के दो अलग अलग जो major genres हम देखते हैं वो है एक fiction और non-fiction. Now when I talk about non-fiction, there is a common sense attached to it which says that जो important messages हमें देने हैं वो non-fiction से ज़्यादा अच्छे से आते हैं. और fiction is fiction. Who pays so much attention to fiction? But if you want to deliver an important message to the readers or to the society, then you must go the non-fiction way. Do you agree to this? Is fiction fictional?
On the contrary, all my books have been real fiction, in the sense they've all been inspired from real incidents or real issues around you. And I feel that stories in a novel form are more palatable for the youth. But I think it's a question which ideally you should throw to them. You know, what would they prefer? To read in a non-fiction format, to read something spiced up in a story format, in a fictionalized novel format. For me, I think it's been the other way around. Of 13 books that I've written, 3 are non-fiction, but all the other ones are essentially inspired from real incidents and fictionalized. So you can, a guessing game could go on which character is inspired from whom.
So, non-fiction and fiction, I wouldn't categorize differently for one reason. That, and I agree there, that, when we grow up on stories. And those stories don't necessarily have to be real incidents. They are stories that we grow up on, and these stories of fiction, I grew up reading, whether it is Russian novels of Dostoevsky and others, or European novels or Indian. It tells you it tells you about the society in those times, and that's why fiction is also important, because कहानियाँ हैं fiction में. अब non-fiction में क्या हो गया है कि non-fiction is also told through the medium of the narrative, the fiction narrative. And if you see why people, and to your point, why people are picking up non-fiction and believing in the message of non-fiction, is because वो non-fiction की किताबें आज के दिन में जो हम बोलते हैं non-fiction, the narrative style, वो narrative style का माध्यम है storytelling के माध्यम से. So non-fiction told by way of a narrative sits very easily and is absorbed much better. So it is the medium, and the medium is of telling your non-fiction book is actually fiction. And a lot of our expressions and stories are derived from these books that we have all grown up reading, whether it is when we were kids or uske baad mein. So all of these stories told us the art of expression. और वही art of expression जब आप non-fiction की किताब लिखते हैं and you use the narrative, that is conveyed much better. And that is why you have non-fiction which is also rooted in reality. So people say, oh, real है, और ये इनकी जो कहानी के बताने का तरीका है, that is interesting because that is rooted in the fiction style, but you're telling a story that is real. And that kind of combines very well. So I wouldn't categorize them differently, but I would think that both have their importance and places, and they both have a relevance. It is the real, the factual nature of non-fiction combined with the style of fiction, which makes for a long-lasting impression.
Well said, sir. Well said.
I agree with Prabal on that. That if it's non-fiction, you identify better. You know some real person did this. So you feel कि अच्छा अगर ये कर सकते हैं तो हम भी कर सकते हैं. So I think they're more inspiring. But other than that, I think sometimes we just read. We don't want any messages. You just want to read for the pleasure of reading, right? Or sometimes you just want to write for the pleasure of writing. I'm a writer. So I don't want my story to have any message for you. I just want you to enjoy that book. एक कहानी है जो आपको अच्छी लगी, कुछ characters जो आपको पसंद आए, मज़ा आया पढ़ने में. There's no message at all. So of course there are messages with a lot of writers. So both ways, it works for me both ways. मैं पढ़ती हूँ बहुत सारे psychological thrillers, the kind Tuhin writes. अभी मैं लेने वाली हूँ उनकी कोई किताब to read. But I really enjoy reading those, and there's no message in that. It's just a psychological thriller. एक murder हुआ है, किसने किया ये पता चला है end में. I love reading it just for the story.
Okay. I want a show of hands. How many of you like reading? I'm not talking about Instagram stories. Huh? Okay, that is a sizable number. And how many of you read books or anything apart from your educational syllabus? Okay, that is also a sizable number. So that's good. So apart from whatever I've been doing on the radio and music, etc., I'm also a master's in English literature. And when I was studying literature, we were taught that literature or art is a mirror of the society. I don't know how far is that true. My next question is loosely related to this. So, does literature influence the society? Or does the society influence literature? क्या होना चाहिए, क्या हो रहा है, आपके thoughts?
So I think it's a symbiotic relationship.
Okay.
Where when you talk about literature and society, अभी कहानी तो आप बिना society के तो नहीं लिख सकते हो. So it is based on a society, it's based on human relationships, it's based on certain events. So society is reflected in literature. So abhi, if you pick up a Dickens, Charles Dickens ki kahani, so Charles Dickens ki kahani se you get to know what was happening in that era, right? So that's the best way of, and it is more enduring. I do understand that all social media and a lot of the things very easily conveyed, but books have endured centuries of conflicts and turmoil and everything, and it's still there. So they convey the times that we lived in once. I mean, there's Second World War, First World War, films, books, they convey what happened there. So those stories, the books, convey the society of those times. That is one. Now, society reflects books because, we spoke about how much we read, how much we consume, how much we absorb, and किस तरीके से society उसको पर्दे पे देखना पसंद करता है. A book written by somebody wants to see it in the movie because he wants to consume it quickly. या तो social media में consume. So, so the society also, it's a symbiotic relationship where the books are treated by the society of that day, whether it is in some form or the other. And in a way, literature also reflects the times that they've been written about and what happened then. So I think they go hand in hand. And one kind of depicts the other, and both are enduring in the long run.
Input, sir.
Well, I always say this, that our generation did not grow up wanting to become authors. We became authors by default because the Indian publishing industry only opened up around 2 decades ago. So there was a lot of trial and error method involved in my choice of stories and the selection of stories. And a lot of it would be influenced by my thought process at that point of time.
Okay.
So if you look at the trajectory from 2006 to 2023, obviously there have been intermittent breaks in between, but they reflect the larger thought process. So if 2006, the first book was around complicated relationships in an urban metro,
Yeah.
the later ones, post 2015, have largely been around political issues. They obviously are an extension of what I feel about certain political, issues. So it's both ways. Real life influencing fiction, and your writing influencing, your life choices. But essentially, I think most writers don't plan it that way. They go by what they feel instinctively about at a given point of time. Yeah, that's that.
Okay, so sometimes I think books reflect society, and sometimes I think the author is so creative that he or she thinks of a concept that is not out of society, which hasn't happened, which probably the Harry Potter series आप लोगों ने पढ़ी होगी, कई लोगों ने. So those are things जो नहीं हो रहे society में. It's completely imagined by the author. So when you write fiction, your hands are not tied at all. Anything that you think, that you imagine can be put down in a book. So it's neither society, nor rules, nor regulations, nor rules of gravity or science. Nothing applies to it. So fiction has this immense power. You can imagine anything, you can write anything, and people might start believing what you've written. Other than that, I think it works the other way, that fiction बोल रही हूँ, books do influence society. For example, I wrote a story about Captain Vikram Batra, who won a Paramveer Chakra award. फिर उस पे picture बनी. Of course, it was not on my book, but movie बनी, and I'm sure movie made it very visible. After the movie came out, when people saw the dishy Siddharth Malhotra and Kaira Advani there, तो उन्होंने किताब पढ़ी उसके बाद में. Then lot of them got inspired, and they say हमें भी देश के लिए लड़ना है, या हमें भी आर्मी ज्वाइन करनी है. So I think that's an example of how a book can influence society.
So out of all the forms of storytelling, अगर हम बात करें versus an OTT or versus a movie and a book, अगर मैं कोई वीडियो देखता हूँ किसी एक पर्टिकुलर टॉपिक के बारे में, या एक डॉक्यूमेंट्री या एक मूवी देखता हूँ, और उसी टॉपिक के बारे में अगर मैं एक बुक पढ़ता हूँ, do you think that the book is more believable or is more authentic than the video, or is it just a preconceived notion in our minds? कि बुक है तो ये ऑथेंटिक ही होगा, किताब में लिखा हुआ है. आई एम नॉट गोइंग एनीवेयर टुवर्ड्स रिलीजन और पॉलिटिक्स, बट किताब में लिखा हुआ है तो सही होगा, वीडियो पे आया है तो गलत है. इज दिस नोशन करेक्ट?
आई एम नॉट टू श्योर अबाउट दैट कि ऐसा होता है या नहीं होता, पर ये तो ज़रूर होता है कि आप अगर पहले पिक्चर देख लें या पहले आपने सीरियल देख लिया, किताब आपने पढ़ी नहीं है, तो आप उसको उसके डायरेक्टर की आंख से देख रहे हैं. उसका एक वॉइस है डायरेक्टर का, उसने किताब पढ़ी और उसने पिक्चर बनाई, उसने उसको कैसे परसीव किया आपने वो देखा. उसके बाद अगर आप किताब पढ़ेंगे, यू विल सी इट फ्रॉम हिज आइज. सो आई वुड ऑलवेज से कि किताब खुद पढ़ो, पहले पढ़ो पिक्चर देखने से पहले, सो दैट यू फॉर्म योर ओन कैरेक्टर्स. लाइक फॉर एग्जाम्पल, अगर आपने शेरशाह पिक्चर देख ली, उसके बाद आपने विक्रम बत्रा की कहानी पढ़ी, तो आपको सिद्धार्थ मल्होत्रा ही नज़र आएगा उसमें, और डिम्पल में कायरा अडवाणी ही नज़र आएगी. यू विल नॉट हैव योर ओन विजन. सो दैट्स जस्ट एन एडवाइस आई हैव. आई विल पास इट ऑन.
So that happens often, and मेरा ये मानना है कि books, when you watch a movie, it is an image that you have, और वो कुछ दिनों तक last करती है. But the impact of the book, of a book, lasts over a longer time. It's a slow process. It's a drip process where you read a book and you read it after 10 years. और कई बार मैंने ये भी देखा है कि when you read a book at the age of 18, it reads very differently to you. When you read a book at the age of 26, you absorb it very differently. And later on, you see it very differently. So book offers you different angles to the same story, and depending on from which, what is the angle you're taking, what timeline are you reading in, what age are you reading in, which is the beauty of it. It's a printed word, उसमें कुछ जादूगरी नहीं है, printed word है, वही expressions है, आप अलग अलग तरीके से उसको absorb कर रहे हो at different points of time in your age. And I think that is the beauty of a book. As far as the movie is concerned, I think it does impact you a lot easily. It makes a quicker impression. And the one thing that I would think which has evolved now is that movies did not capture the entire canvas of a book, because उसको 2 घंटे की picture है, book is like 400 words, 400 pages, 60,000 words, 70,000 words. तो वो पूरी तरीके से capture नहीं होती है. But the good news here is that people today want to want to see more stories. And that's why the books are being adapted into longer series. Abhi aap pehle, that's the thing. We talk about this generation being impatient, but this is the generation that's watching the OTT series as well, which is a longer version, which is also a reflection that a book can actually find its space, its expression in a longer form, such as an 8-part series, 6-part. Rocket Boys aaye hai, and I would agree on this point that people thought that Jim Sarbh was Homi Baba, whereas actually when you read about Homi Baba and the entire set of people who worked on the projects, it gives you a deeper perspective, and then you go and watch the movie, you are able to retain it better, and you can question a lot of things internally inside your head as well. But as I said, books offer you different perspectives, and in different times of your age. Try it. Today you are much younger. Tomorrow you read the same book, you will remember that this is something that was once discussed in a panel, that today you read the book differently than what you read, how you read it 10 years ago. That is one of the things, that is one of the thoughts that I leave it with.
The book enjoys greater sanctity, so it's a referral point for you for a longer period of time. And an OTT series or a movie enjoys greater entertainment ability. It's quicker consumption. So I think a lot of people don't have a natural habit for reading. For them, it's at least good if they consume it in an audiovisual form. But to go back to the sanctity or to go back to the original information, I think books are the books form the foundation of the story on which you improvise to further media.
A lot of people in the current generation also listen to podcasts and audiobooks. Now, when I read a book, like Rachna ma'am was rightly saying, that when we read about a character or a story, then we make our own imagination. So Harry Potter अगर मैंने पढ़ा है, तो Harry Potter का image मेरे दिमाग में बहुत अलग था. And when I saw it in the movie, it was the director's imagination and not my imagination. What do you think happens when now all the books or almost all the books are getting converted into audiobooks? Do you think it changes the way how the story is being perceived by the reader and here the listener?
Well, that's actually an advantage, I think the biggest gratification for an author should be that readers are able to interpret his or her story in myriad forms and come back to him with a feedback which is actually enlightening for him. So in fact, there are times when I have got reviews from readers which have exceeded my expectations, and it has made me believe that, I never thought of the character in the form that it was perceived. So I think it should be an enriching experience for the author. And I wrote a book, The Edge of Desire, in 2012, which was largely about the story of a woman, the wife of an IAS. It was loosely inspired from a real-life incident which happened in Orissa way back in 1990s, where the wife of an IAS officer was raped. So it was the story had a loose trigger from that incident, but I fictionalized it to lead to a point where that incident in some way becomes the turning point of her life, and she eventually goes on to become a top leader of a country. There is a whole process involved in that. Now, when I had to sum up that story, after writing, I realized that there is a loose thread between the idea of Mahabharata and the story, where one line was that, can the humiliation of a woman impact the destiny of an entire nation? So I think there are many times when you realize that the ideas you're setting or ideas that you are feeding through the stories are far bigger than what you originally set out to write. And the same happens when a reader gives you a feedback which exceeds your own imagination. So there is no formula involved in it. I think one should be very open to feedback from readers, and the more myriad the feedback, the better it is for the...
Okay, sir, ma'am, would you want to add something to this? Audiobooks versus physical books?
I think it just adds another dimension, and it just also brings in a lot of people who would have not read books. You read, you hear a podcast, you have an interest ignited, which leads you to read a book. Kai baar hum picture dekhte hain, and you see a movie, and you then Google about the characters. If it's about
all of us do that, right? So it's a process of learning. It's a process of discovery. And various dimensions, various platforms, jahan se aap, you gain an understanding of what those story about, and you want to gain a deeper understanding, and that it's again it's complementary. So you go back and read a book and try and understand more about something that you found interesting in a podcast. So all avenues lead to the story, and all roads lead to the book and the story at the end of the day. And if it's somebody who reading up to this place, it's a good thing.
All right. Would you want to add something to this?
Yeah, I think I agree. It's good for books that audiobooks are happening, because it's not taking away anything from the book. It's being true to the book. It's giving a voice to the book, characters in the book. And if somebody famous, like say, if Amitabh Bachchan is reading it or Shah Rukh Khan is reading it, then it adds glamour also to the book. Bichare, unfortunately, literature mein zyada glamour nahi hota, so people like that add it. Also, people don't have time these days. बड़े शहरों में लोग एक डेढ़ घंटा ड्राइव करके दे गोइंग टू वर्क कमिंग बैक, तो उस टाइम पे वो ऑडियो बुक्स मैंने बहुत लोगों को सुना है जो कि किताब नहीं पढ़ पाते पर ऑडियो बुक्स सुन लेते हैं. So is anybody listening to audio books here?
Yeah, of course. I mean.
Oh, great.
Sure
Yeah. Good for books.
Okay, so आपने अभी कहा कि लिटरेचर और ग्रामर का, लिटरेचर और ग्लैमर का कोई लेना देना नहीं है. वैसे तो है in some way. But my question is, so when we talk of a movie, okay, a movie is essentially the story, the director, his vision or her vision, and the glamour, meaning the stars and the songs and so on and so forth, the locations, etc. And that is a more perceived or accepted formula of a hit film. अच्छा director, अच्छे actors, अच्छे locations, अच्छे गाने और अच्छी story, obviously. What is the formula for a hit book?
What's the formula for a hit book? I think they should touch the heart of the reader. And the only way to touch the heart of a reader, it doesn't guarantee it, but it should touch the writer's heart. Tabhi there is a possibility it might touch the reader's heart. If it is not touching my heart as a writer, then to no chance that anybody is going to pick up and read it. So that's it.
Two things. I think the writer has to have his or her own voice. And I think that is unique. I think that must be there in a book. A unique voice, जो आपकी खुद की आवाज़ है, खुद की पहचान है. That is your identity. The second thing is that it has to be a compelling story, a compelling topic, a subject where you're connecting with the readers. Because otherwise, you can write a book. You can write a book which you want to write, and it may have nothing to do with connecting with readers. But if you want a book that reaches out to the largest section of the audience, then it has to be a compelling idea, a compelling thought. And the third thing here is the style has to be very engaging. It has to be an engaging where you're able to connect with your readers rather than away.
Can you change Sir's mic? थोड़ा disturbance आ रहा है उसमें.
Can I just add a line to that?
Yeah, please.
मेरे को एक Ruskin Bond की saying याद आई. He said that I write for myself and people like me. So when I write a book, I should like it. ज़रूरी नहीं है सबको पसंद आएगी. But there will be people like me जिनको वो शायद अच्छी लगे. So that's another thing.
I think the conviction that goes into the creation and the nurturing of your characters and the journey of the characters, that's what makes the difference between a successful and a unsuccessful book. But apart from that, to be honest, nowadays writing and publishing is 40-50% of the job. I think a writer has to be equally persuasive in marketing and pushing the book across, in creating a possible chain of similar books, which are things which I did not do at the early stage of my career. But I believe, once you write a book, you need to have the larger picture in mind, where over the next 5 years you have similar products coming out, so that the subsequent books whets up the demand for the previous book and vice versa.
All right, great. audience, I would request everyone to be a little quieter, even if you're talking, especially the people in the front row. All right, so these are now a couple of questions which I would want to directly put to you. So I'll first begin with Tuhin sir. The Edge of Desire. Now, when we talk about books, and when you say that it's about a woman, and when we talk about even women empowerment or biographies written for women, be it Jayalalitha or be it Indira Gandhi, do you think that a biography on a woman also needs a male perspective or a male presence?
Well, absolutely. You know, without, in fact, that brings me to the larger issue of gender neutrality. In 2012, I wrote this book. If I were to write a similar book today, I think rape laws in the country need to be gender neutral. So I think a gender neutral perspective is always very important. And there is a beautiful equation in this book between the victim, Shruti Ranjan, and her mentor, who kind of pulls her out of the mess. And in certain uncanny ways, that equation is very similar to the equation which Krishna and Draupadi shared in Mahabharata. So that way, the balancing of perspective is done through the character of this mentor, Sharat Malviya, in the book. But yes, I mean, any female story also has to, you know, it can't be an out-and-out feminist story. It needs to bring in the male perspective, which one would do by, you know, setting in certain important male characters. And, for example, the character of her husband, who supports her through certain dark times, but eventually, you know, exposes himself as somebody who could not bear her success when she actually goes on to become a... So I think there are many shades in this book. While being a woman's story, it is important to have certain male characters in her journey who kind of, you know, balance the perspective, the gender perspective.
All right, okay. Probal sir, your book, Watershed 1967. So this is a war which is probably not been very commonly talked about. And when you encompass an entire war and the proceedings and whatever happened later, how challenging was it to write specifically about a war and the incidents that happened?
Yeah. So thank you. I'll just step back and talk about why this particular... There were a set of battles, actually. Not a war, but a set of battles which decided a lot of things. So since we are in the session of storytelling, there's a story behind the book as well. And what happened was 2017, and it is about India and China. Major actors in this region and in the world today. And 2017 में डोकलम का क्राइसिस हुआ था, जब इंडिया और चाइना का स्टैंड ऑफ हुआ था. And उस वक्त when I was, I remember the media channels, everyone, discourses, academic discourses, was full of how India had received a setback in 1962 in the war against China. Everywhere, whether it is historians, military scholars, military officers, regular readers, academics, media, everyone was talking, was actually consumed by 1962. Or so when at a lunch, I told a friend of mine that, do you know the last time India and China went to conflict, it was India which won that and not China. His jaws dropped, and he called up people. He says, we don't know about this. And lo and behold, nobody had known about a victory that India had achieved. 5 years, it was a redemptive victory, 5 years after it had been at the receiving end in 1962. Or wo tha 1967. Now, what happened that, that was a period which decided a lot of things, because for 50 years, India and China never fought again. And it's also started India's ascendancy by way of, continued victories, 67, 71, then 84 in Siachen and 99 in Kargil. So all of that. It also started China's sort of series of defeats. So 67 against India, 69 against the Soviet Union in Ussuri, and 78, 79 Vietnam. So wo baat alag hai. So the thing is, it was an important time of a period of inflection in history. And we had actually, that had been, that kind of history was shelved. So it was an idea whose time had come. But the fact is, to your question, so it is not easy, therefore, to look at, covering that period. It's not just the war, but a lot of diplomatic tussles, political drama, Naxal movement shuru hua. China was applying a lot of pressure. But that was one of the reasons why China didn't interfere in the 1971 India-Pakistan conflict war. And normally our archival systems are not very strong. So, I had to rely on a lot of source inputs. I had to rely on oral history. I had to rely on regimental history. I had to go to units, battalions, diplomats who had been there at that point of time, spoke with a host of people. So it's not, it's something that I have always seen, that, we are not very good archivists.
Yeah.
And we don't have, not as good as, the British or the Americans, because, they have had their data and their history preserved very well, which makes it difficult when you go back in time to record and write about history. And, and people grow old, so you don't have sources for 1967, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. God will them long lives, but you'll still not have people who have memories. So yes, it was, but it is a journey which you enjoy when you write a book, and you immerse yourself in it, you invest your time, and it is your idea, these 3 I's, and as long as you have them, and as you have the honesty, intellectual honesty, and the sustenance, I think it is an idea that you live with, and you translate it into a book. And this was one, because it had not been written about in over half a century, a victory that changed the course of history.
So has your association with the army helped you in writing or forming the story better? How was the association? Because a lot of students might not know.
Yeah. So Rachna has written a book on General Bipin Rawat. So General Bipin Rawat used to be the chief. So when I started to write the book, the first person I went to meet was him. And he used to be, when I joined the army, he was a major, he was an adjutant, and he was in my battalion. So I'd known him for a long time. So I went to him, I said, I would like to write this. So he said, you go and meet this guy. So to your point, so I could go to people who I had long-term association with.
Right.
And Rachna would allude, that kind of helps to sort of build on your, build on your connects by getting a free flow of conversations with people who can give you a gold mine of information, which you can put together. So yes, the connection with army helps, but you also have to see how those meetings with sources, those interviews are aligned to your idea. I think that is central. Our idea is the romance, or uske baad mein it's masonry. The writing is the masonry part, where you are, chugging along, but this helps where you go, and your basic understanding of the battles, your understanding of how it happened, the military understanding of it, as well as the people that all of them kind of come together. So yes,
right.
The short answer is yes, it helps. But you have to. It's like you have all the masalas in the kitchen, but you have to know when to use which one and how to cook that recipe.
All right. So I will come back to the association of army later. But before I do that, Rachna, my question to you about the book Kargil, Untold Stories from the War. How did this journey, how did it impact you, in the sense that what was your take-home message or emotion or learning or understanding when you researched for the book, when you spoke to the people involved in the story? So what impact did that have on you, the making of the book?
Okay, so I'll just tell you a little bit about how the book came about.
Sure.
I was in Ahmedabad, very close to Vadodara. My husband was posted there when the Kargil war happened. And I was a reporter with Indian Express. तो उस टाइम क्या होता था, बॉडीज़ आती थी वापस जो वॉर में शहीद हुए हैं. सो गुजरात में भी बहुत सारे शहीद थे. उनकी बॉडीज़ आती थी और हमको भेजा जाता था उनको उनके फ्यूनरल प्रोसेशंस कवर करने के लिए. सो आई एंड अ फोटोग्राफर वुड गो एंड वी वुड कवर द लॉस ऑफ दोज स्मॉल चिल्ड्रन और ओल्ड पेरेंट्स जिनका बच्चा 20, 21, 22. दैट वाज द एज वेयर मोस्ट पीपल वर लॉस्ट इन द कारगिल वॉर. वेरी यंग ऑफिसर्स एंड सोल्जर्स. दे डाइड. उनकी बॉडी आ रही है, उनके पेरेंट्स रिसीव कर रहे हैं. सो दैट लेफ्ट अ वेरी बिग इम्पैक्ट. And that was also the time when we heard about Saurabh Kalia. All of you are very young. I don't know if you heard about it, but that's one of the most gruesome crimes across the world in a war, where Captain Saurabh Kalia was just 22 years old when he went to fight the Kargil war. उनके साथ 5 सिपाही और थे और उनको कैप्चर कर लिया गया. शुरू की बात है जब इंडिया को पता भी नहीं था कि पाकिस्तान कहाँ कहाँ आके बैठा हुआ है. ही वॉज कैप्चर्ड. उनके वेपन्स ले लिए गए, उनको कैप्टिविटी में रखा गया और टॉर्चर किया गया. एंड आफ्टर 2 months देयर बॉडीज़ वर रिटर्न्ड. सो आई सॉ द पोस्टमार्टम रिपोर्ट्स ऑफ दोज बॉडीज़. सो इट वॉज टेरेबल. यू कैन गूगल एंड सी उनके साथ क्या नहीं किया उन लोगों ने वाइल दे वर स्टिल अलाइव. एंड आफ्टर दैट दे डाइड. सो हिज बॉडी वॉज ब्रॉट बैक टू हिज ओल्ड पेरेंट्स इन हिमाचल प्रदेश. और उस समय से मुझे लगता था कि इंडियन गवर्नमेंट नेवर टुक इट अप. दैट क्राइम वॉज नेवर टेकन अप इन द एमनेस्टी और एनी इंटरनेशनल फोरम. इनफैक्ट आई हैड गॉन फॉर अ फेलोशिप टू लंडन एंड आई आस्क्ड एमनेस्टी ऑफिशियल्स कि आपने व्हाई डिड यू नॉट से एनीथिंग टू पाकिस्तान व्हेन दिस हैपेंड. एंड दे सेड बिकॉज योर गवर्नमेंट नेवर अप्रोच्ड अस. सो वो दैट रैंकल्ड एट द बैक ऑफ माई माइंड कि वो लड़ने तो हम सब के लिए गए थे पर हम भूल गए उनके फादर जो अब बहुत बुज़ुर्ग हो गए डॉक्टर कालिया, वो अभी तक लड़ रहे हैं फॉर दैट टू बी रिकग्नाइज्ड एज अ वॉर क्राइम एंड टू फाइंड आउट कि ये किसने किया और उनको पनिश करना चाहिए. क्योंकि वॉर इज़ बिटवीन 2 countries. उसके रूल्स होते हैं. ऐसा नहीं होता कि आप निहत्थे आदमी को टॉर्चर करें. आप सामने सामने लड़िए. प्रिजनर्स ऑफ वॉर्स आर टेकन, दे आर रिटर्न्ड. They are not supposed to be tortured or put in jail. So anyways, so that was the guilt in my mind कि as citizens हमने कभी याद भी नहीं किया उस बात को. So the least I could do when Penguin told me they wanted a book on Kargil, I told them Saurabh Kalia की कहानी मैं लिखना चाहती हूँ. That will be part of the book. So that was the first story of the book. I would request you guys to read it just because we need to remember कि कितना एक सिपाही ने सहा है इस देश के लिए और उसको हम याद भी नहीं करते. सो दैट वाज जस्ट अ स्मॉल थिंग दैट आई वांटेड just to absolve myself of that guilt which I always felt as an army wife, as an army daughter, that एक सिपाही था जो मर गया लड़ाई में, जिसको टॉर्चर किया गया और उसके लिए कुछ भी नहीं हुआ. So that's the background of Kargil.
All right, so one question to Tuhin Sinha, the great tribal warriors of Bharat. How do we select or shortlist 17 people? क्योंकि ये तो बहुत बड़ा लिस्ट होगा.
Before I answer this question, what Rachna ji just said, it still gives me goosebumps to think of the kind of atrocity, the kind of monstrosity which Pakistan would heap on our soldiers, and therefore, you know, I really feel it deserved the fate that it is in today. Now, coming to the great tribal warriors of Bharat, you know, great tribal warriors of Bharat is the second part of the trilogy on subaltern warriors. The third, in fact, just goes into print either this evening or tomorrow, which is again on Sidhu Kano. Sidhu Kano were the protagonists of a Santhal war in 1855. And again, like Probal ji just mentioned, it's a story which, you know, he was mentioning about the 1967 war, which India won. But this story of 1855, in terms of its magnitude, probably was as huge as the 1857 war, but somehow never got reported properly because many of the sepoys deployed to combat this eventually died in 1857. So the records, you know, came out very sporadically, and unlike today where you exactly know in real time what's happening in Tashkent or in what's happening in Ukraine or what's happening in Pakistan, in those days, what would happen in tribal or subaltern areas would not come out for years till the protagonists were gone. So it was always a challenge. My idea, like for each of these 3 books of the trilogy, given the nature, given the challenges involved in digging out information, we've employed different styles. For example, Birsa Munda is eventually a novel. The 17 tribal warriors, basically, we tried to cover warriors from across the country. So there are 4 from the northeast, there is 1 from the south, there is Tantia Bhil from Madhya Pradesh, there is Govind Giri from an area very close to Baroda. Many of you may have heard of him. There are 4 women involved, which includes Rani Gadendu. So I think the idea was to bring a wholesome mix of soldiers and also to give it a span from 1783, which is when the first important tribal revolution was recorded, right up to 1947. So the last tribal warrior is not essentially a warrior. He's a person who was the only representative of the tribal community in our constituent assembly, Jaipal Munda. But then eventually he has been referred to as a warrior because he, fought for the rights of the tribal community. It was a big challenge, and that is why each of the character basically collates basic information. It's a small book. The idea is, I'm very candid about it. I'm not a historian, but I am setting the ground for historians to come forth and now to, dig out more information and bring out authentic studies about these characters about whom I have curated a narrative.
All right. My last question for this session to Probal sir. आप आर्मी में कब से कब तक थे, कहाँ पर पोस्टेड थे, और what do you think about the representation of military or the armed forces in movies? क्या सही में हवन करेंगे ऐसे गाने गाते हैं सब लोग मिलके?
So the question is in 2 parts. So I served in the army for 10 years, after which I started my journey in the corporate. Lived a few years in the US and got back to India, and that corporate journey, and now of course I in my other avatar as a writer as well and a historian. So to your question as to किस तरीके से depict की जाती हैं, I think the authenticity in movies is an essential part. अगर आप authentic नहीं हैं तो then it doesn't. As far as songs are, I think we have to look at it differently there, because songs are a part of our cultural representation in movies. So if there is a song that represents a particular moment, that is usually treated as a song in the movie. That is fine. But the other things, the authenticity of the action, the authenticity of your uniform, आप किस तरीके से lanyard लगा रहे हो, किस तरीके से आपके epaulets में stars लगे हुए हैं, किस तरीके से बेरे पहनी है आपने. I think those things are also important, because if they are not, then they lose relevance. अभी हमने थोड़ी देर पहले बात करी कि why is non-fiction relatable? It is because people identify those facts as true. So when you see somebody who doesn't look like a Fauji, but is depicted as one in the movies, you don't really relate. So you don't, because today it's information surplus. You get information from all sources. You get Google में आपको कैसा फौजी दिखता है, उसकी यूनिफॉर्म मिल जाएंगी आपको किस तरीके से पॉलिट्स लगाने वो मिल जाएंगे, कहाँ पे क्या होना है. And plus you have access to movies, quality movies from across the globe, European movies, global movies, Hollywood. So they pay a lot of attention, which is the good thing. The good news here is that there are a lot of people, some people I know who have been roped in as military advisors to movies, and I think some of those films are, and you can see the way the action happens in that movie, how it is shown, how the movements are shown, and you will see the stamp of an expert. जैसे आप कभी movies में जाते हैं, I don't think there is a movie that goes to the floor without somebody advising the movie stars on fashion, right? On clothes. So similarly, if it's an action movie, military movie, it's important that you have advisors who have adequate experience and understanding. And that's what's happening, which is a good thing.
So basically you are happy with the representation?
I think we always move from a lesser place of learning to a better place of learning.